I know everyone would probably like us to start on Brexit and just stay on Brexit, but I think it would be useful to have a bit of information about who you were before June the 24th.
I think quite a lot of people in the room probably know who I was before then, in that co-founding SCM in 2009 and then the True and Fair campaign in 2012, and doing a lot of work around transparency and accountability in the charity sector through the True and Fair Foundation. So very much a transparency activist, I suppose, just asking questions about establishments and perhaps when nobody else wanted to ask the questions, putting my head above the parapet.
You mentioned the True and Fair campaign there, because this is not, the Brexit thing is not your first controversial campaign, because True and Fair has been quite controversial. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more about what that stands for and why there was a bit of pushback on it.
I think the True and Fair campaign is very simple. It's saying why don't consumers, investors, have two very basic rights, which is A, knowing exactly what they're buying, and B, exactly what they're paying. It's very simple. It happens in every other sector, but since the FSA report in 2000 on hidden fees, very little seemed to have changed in the industry. So it was asking those questions, doing research-backed questions on how much fees were being hidden, the different levels, conflicts of interest when it came to closet indexing, all those areas, which ended up with us successfully contributing text to MiFID II, PRIPS, and the Shareholder Directive. So we've managed to change the dial, I think, or move the dial, but there is a huge amount of work to be done.
And how do you go from fund fees and fund transparency to Brexit?
I was actually on the road from the October before the June referendum vote and managed to fall out with both sides because I felt that the Remain messaging was too binary, too alarmist, and I really wanted them to talk about remaining, reforming, and reviewing our membership because there are many things wrong with the EU that need reforming. And I think if we look at where we are now, the unfortunate thing is the benefits of us leaving Brexit could be that the EU benefits from that reform, but we won't be in it to benefit from that, which I think is one of the failures of what we've done, but we are where we are. I was trying to talk about accountability, talk about the fact that politicians were lying, and this was not about the country. This was about healing the Conservative Party. So just asking questions and going to the lion's den around the country. And I was absolutely convinced that we were going to leave 2-3 months before. And that filled me with horror because I didn't believe there was a plan on either side. And when the government started talking about the royal prerogative, I studied law. I'm not particularly clever. Any first-year law student will tell you they learn about the royal prerogative and the sovereignty of Parliament. So it was, how could the government use the royal prerogative? It's against the law. So I simply went to court and asked the question. It was not about stopping Brexit. It was actually preventing our government from setting an incredibly dangerous precedent because we don't have a written constitution, which is that any future prime minister could use the royal prerogative on the domestic plane and bypass Parliament and take away any single right from any single one of us. That was what I was fighting for.
And you very much became the face of that campaign, but it was a wider group of people, wasn't it, behind that? Perhaps you could tell us about how they came together.
It was very interesting, this idea that I put myself up as being the face and seeking publicity, etc. So on the 19th of July, there were 6 cases that went before Lord Leveson, and he chose me as the lead claimant on my case for 2 reasons, actually 3 reasons, I think. One is we were very, very careful to make our case a back letter of the law. We did not involve any political statement in our case. It was purely a constitutional case. Secondly, ironically, we followed process because some of the other cases were so eager to get into the limelight that they applied straight to court, and you can't do that. You have to do something called a pre-action letter and follow protocol, and that's what we did. And thirdly, because I think I bagged Lord Panic, who is one of the best minds, and the courts wanted someone who could argue a very important constitutional case. So the courts made me the lead claimant. I did not appoint myself to that position.
And how was that process? Because, of course, there was initial success and then it faltered slightly, didn't it?
How did it falter?
Well, there was initial success in that it was voted through, and then there was some pushback.
No, the court case was a resounding success. What happened after that is spineless politicians didn't do the job. They basically voted against themselves. You know, to have voted against the two amendments, one is EU citizens, which is just the right thing to do, and secondly, against a meaningful vote, is just pure and utter nonsense, because they've basically, logic and common sense says, nobody can see into the future, nobody knows what's going to happen. Why would you not want all options on the table so that you can make a choice and vote on that? So, for whatever reasons, and there are many reasons, I believe, yes, the MPs, bearing in mind what I invested, you know, I feel that the Labour Party in particular, I should not have had to bring this case. It should have been, they are the questions the opposition was supposed to ask, and they didn't, and they're still not asking.
And you said yourself there that you were the one who put your head above the parapet. How's that experience been? Because you've been branded as sort of chief Ramona, among other things, but actually you're very clear when in your messaging that it's not about, it's politically neutral, it's party neutral, it's actually about, you know, applying the law.
It was about applying the law, and what I'm doing now is about asking what's fair for the country and what's best for Britain. It's not about, I'm apolitical in what I'm doing, because I think the politicians have forgotten to do what's best for our country. It's about career politicians, and I think it's disgraceful that they don't vote with their conscience or and put their principles above their party careers. And because of that, I'm asking questions again, and I'll carry on doing so.
Going back a bit to that Remain and Reform, the ideal circumstance for you, if we were talking sort of this time last year before you saw the outcome coming, what would you have liked to have seen in our relationship with the EU?
I think if our Prime Minister had gone and sat with some of the other member states who are not happy and want to see reform in the structures of the EU, you know, getting rid of Strasbourg, for example, looking at, you know, why do we have the bureaucracy, talking about immigration, not control of free movement within the EU, but intra-immigration into the EU. There are other member states who would have joined, and I believe would have joined our Prime Minister and would have taken, you know, pushed for a harder reform agenda. But that's a past. We can't do anything about that now.
And what about the opportunity we have now with this election coming up? I know that you've launched a recent campaign in order to make Brexit quite a deciding factor in the election for those who want it to be.
I haven't made it a deciding factor. The Prime Minister has made it a deciding factor, because this idea that she needs a bigger mandate, she doesn't, she has a mandate. I think the most sensible thing that can happen now, we are all leavers. This whole idea of talking about Remain is just distracting. I think it's about choice, and common sense and logic says two things to me. One is we should immediately be negotiating a transitional period, because all 27 member states have to agree that. So that should be the first thing that happens. The second thing that happened is we should not be using EU, on both sides, EU citizens and expats as bargaining chips. And thirdly, I think we should be, the candidates we should be backing in this election are the ones who are going to back a meaningful vote at the end of the negotiated period.
And that's quite different from some of the other campaigns that have come up since Brexit. We've got Stanley Johnson, who's saying his son Boris was wrong, and he's launched something called Environmentalists for Europe. There's MEP Annalise Dodds, and even Tony Blair, who wants MPs to publicly admit how they voted themselves before going into this election. You know, what do you think of that kind of campaign versus what you're...
I'm a realist. I don't understand. I've never been somebody who understands why you look back. What's the point of wasting your energy doing that? We are where we are. It is absolutely shameful that you're distracting. We're not doing the things we should be doing. We're not talking about education. Every all-party committee has been suspended. No work of government is happening. And, you know, the waste of time and effort at the moment is quite shocking. And the fact that it's all for, people call elections to power grab, that's it. There's no other reason. And, you know, Mrs. May is extremely wily, extremely clever, and why wouldn't she do what she's doing? But it's unfortunate because it's very distracting. And, you know, if you look at the timelines of what's going on in Europe, the true negotiations won't actually start, it looks like, until after October, which gives us less than a year if we don't get that extension. So I just think the emotion needs to abate, and we need to be, all of this needs to be on a much more reasoned, common sense, logical basis.
And perhaps you could tell me a bit more about Best for Britain, the new campaign.
Best for Britain, we're trying to do three things. One is to say to young people that this is your adult professional life, this is your future. If you, there's no point you sitting there and complaining, you actually have to use your voice. So today we've signed up with 3 organizations, one called Bite the Ballot, My Life, My Say, Citizens UK. So we're targeting 1 million youngsters today. We did a massive YouTube blog campaign yesterday to get them out to vote. Secondly, there is an apathy. People are really quite fed up of referendum elections. You know, we're trying to get turnout up. And thirdly, to identify those candidates, apolitical, in marginal seats, who will back a meaningful vote at the end. So realistically, probably about 30 to 40. And try and reduce that landslide majority that everyone thinks. A lot of pollsters and experts are saying it's not possible to do what we're doing with Best for Britain. In 2015, in Canada, it was a foregone conclusion, apparently. And we were in almost exactly the same situation. And a very similar campaign started, albeit they had 9 months, we have 4 weeks. And even Prime Minister Trudeau himself says it was due to that campaign that he came to power. So we will lose when we stop fighting, and we won't stop fighting.
And there's a crowdfunding app that you're doing this through GoFunder. Where do you see those funds going? I mean, how are you going to spend that money to make this happen?
We will work by doing partnerships with organizations, tactical media campaigning, digital media, Facebook, getting people out. We've got 40 grassroots organizations, massive amounts of people who are going to go out and help candidates in the areas we're talking about. Campaigns next week, we launch our Women's Week. The turnout of women in the last election and the referendum was shameful. You know, there are women who died to give us the vote, and women just are not voting. So it's a huge campaign to try and get women out to vote as well. So trying to just say that this election is very, very important, because Brexit, like it or not, is going to blight every single area of our lives. So you must be involved. You can't sit there and complain and then not have used your vote.
And to that point, how much of what you're doing now is informed or affected by your experience in investment management, or how much of it is just sort of you feel as a sort of citizens?
Well, it's a bit of both, because look, we're nobody in investments, we don't know the future, and we look to balance cost, risk and return. Those are the main things we look to do, and that's what I'm saying. When you look at Brexit, because we don't know the future, we don't know what the EU will look like, we don't know what the deal will look like, we don't know what, we don't know that future, and because of that, that's what we should be doing, looking at the cost, risk and return, balancing that when we make our decision at the end of the negotiated period.
And what about the feedback that you've received? Because I know part of the reason why we kept this session under wraps until today is there has been some negative feedback that's been personal towards you and towards other people who are involved in the campaign, because there's something about Brexit that's become very tribal, it's become very emotive. How do you sort of communicate with those people?
Yeah, every single part of my life has basically been ransacked. I'm a completely different place than I ever thought I would be. But I have 2 ways of coping with it. One is the people who are trying to kill me, my family, whatever it is, are so removed from the value system I have. I'm very happy that they disagree with me, because I would really worry if they agreed with me. Secondly, I don't really care what anybody thinks about what I do. I do it because I think it's the right thing to do. I stand by my principles, and it's up to them. If they want to push back, that's up to them. I'm very centered in why I do what I do and how I do it.
And what about the positive feedback? Because I know when we spoke last week, I was very interested to hear that actually you might expect that it was just Remainers who have been giving you positive feedback, but that's not just the case.
There is a change that happened quite noticeably about 6 or 8 weeks ago. It started as a trickle, and it's continued, where people are saying this is not quite what we thought was going to happen. from all walks of life saying we thought it was going to be much easier than this, we thought we'd leave tomorrow, we didn't appreciate the complexities. There's a reality dawning where people are getting quite nervous and like the idea of what I'm talking about, which is choice, having all options on the table whenever it is that final deal or no deal, or remain, if that's the best option at that time, in a reformed EU. Having all options on the table is just common sense and logic. And
you touched on it there. What if there is no deal? I mean, where do you see the campaign going from here? I mean, the ideal situation is a meaningful vote on policies that are best for the country, but what if that doesn't happen?
Look, if it's a massive landslide, 190 seats, whatever it is, on June the 9th, I mean, Conservatives will win. But if there is this huge landslide, then basically we've got 5 years. We're going to have to go and decide. I think the only answer at that stage, just personally, apolitically, I think it's a new political party, centrist political party, because everyone talks about the Labour Party being wrong. I think it's just my view that momentum should actually leave the Labour Party and become the far left party, but that's only one option, or you have a new centralist party. It's going to be up to the politicians. I don't think any of us, obviously from a business point of view, you have to keep battling and fighting and putting your case, but I think it will be up to the government will have a free hand to do whatever they wish.
Are you concerned about the future of the city and about the future of investment management and financial advice when we leave the EU?
I think every day we're seeing the reports. We're seeing the reports from EY. We're seeing the reports from, the Bank of England asking for, by the 14th of July, they want to see, full scenario planning, including for hard Brexit, to be submitted to them. There's some people who are saying there's lots of differing views. Some people saying, well, WTO won't be that bad because it'll be sort of 4.5%, 4.6%, and that will be, mitigated by the drop in sterling. There are lots of different opinions out there. But the irony is, by triggering Article 50, we gave up control, because we gave the control to the 27 member states. And I just think it's such a vast... If I just give you one thing, so we drop out with no deal. The following day, we actually don't have an agency in place that would be able to satisfy the global airlines in the world that they could land here safely. So America has already said that they would stop their flights landing here the day after we leave with no deal. That's just one example. It is serious, and that's why a transitional agreement is the only option from my view, because it could be that we get an amazing deal. There is a possibility that we get something that is not even on the table at the moment, and it's ourselves, some of the EFTA member states. It could be that things turn out fantastically well, but in the case it doesn't, I'm saying all options have to be on the table.
Do you think Theresa May is the right woman to get that fantastic deal?
She's definitely wily and clever. I'm not sure that one person with a handful of advisors can do this job that we have in front of us. And all the noises we're hearing, everything, is that anyone who speaks up is either sidelined or asked to leave. I worry about the sort of few people doing the enormity of the job ahead of us.
Who do you think would be right? Would it be a collection of people from both public and private sectors?
I think a bit like all-party committees, which are incredibly effective. I think it should be an all-party committee at different levels with different people from different expertise. There are lots of experts, a lot of people, academics. I spoke to somebody from the Russell Group the other day saying they're trying to talk to the government, but the government are not listening to them. They're trying to talk about, their worries about loss of their research budgets. They're already seeing dramatic downturns in applications from not just EU citizens, but global, foreign students en masse. But they're not getting the airtime. They're not getting... maybe things will change completely after the 9th of June. We don't know. Actually, I really hope they do. I'm really worried about, I'm sure like many people in this room, about the tone of the negotiations as they are at the moment, because nobody will benefit from a failing neighbor. And that's on both sides. So if there could be, if the emotions could just roll back and we could start getting proper respect and debate, maybe we'll come out of this better than I think we will at this moment in time.
You mentioned earlier that you were reaching out to particular politicians. What is the feeling, if there has been any communication between your group and the main parties? Has there been any communication?
So the central parties have said their candidates are not allowed to accept our support. But grassroots levels, we are, yes, there's a lot of, both from the point of view of tactical voting of people stepping down, which we are already seeing in quite a number of constituency at grass levels, and also at grass levels, them saying, will you come and help us, which we will be doing going around the country. We've had to enroll another regulator. We are now under the Electoral Commission. The organisation has had to register there. So we're having to be very careful. We have to check every single thing we're doing because we're seen as a political lobbyist organisation now.
And why do you think there has been such a negative reaction to what you're trying to do?
Because everyone's still stuck in Remain and Leave. Because I'm seen as a Ramona breaker, whatever it is. The emotion of Brexit, I mean, Brexit, to my mind, was an emotional spasm. Nobody who voted Leave to hurt themselves and their families. Some, it was because they were crying out. They wanted to be heard when they weren't being heard. And it's actually up to the people who voted Remain to do the hard work now and to hear and to engage and to listen. Because unless we do that, unless we understand why that emotional spasm happened, we won't mend the divides and we won't move forwards. So the longer we keep on remaining, whatever it is, it's just so childish. We just need to move on.
I think the expectation from some people, whether or not it is from yourself as well, is that the next logical step for you would to be the figurehead of that party that does replace Theresa May. Do you have political ambitions in that way?
Two reasons why no. One is I think if you become a politician or an MP, you should give 110% of your time to your constituents. You should not have any other distractions. Think back a few. I'm not in that place. You know, SCM Direct is still fairly new business. I have a lot of work still to do on both the campaigning in True and Fair and also in the charity sector. I'm not in that place. And secondly, I would not follow the party line. I would not be whipped and I would not have speeches written for me and repeat them unless I believed in them. So it's the old, Marx thing, if a club wants you, it's the one club you don't want to join. That's probably me in politics.
Who's your Justin Trudeau then? Who is your person who's going to upset the apple cart?
I don't think we know that person yet. Quite a lot of the people who I think could do it are tainted. And for whatever reasons, different generations won't forgive them. So I don't really think that person is there yet. And we, after the 9th of June, we have 5 years. Actually, it's 2 to 3 years. And perhaps that person will emerge at that stage.
What's your optimum result when we hear it on the 9th of June?
If we can reduce the majority to sort of 20 to 30 seats, I would be delighted. Because at least that means we've got different voices who will put principles above politics and really hold the government account. I mean, I think, it might be a task that's not possible, but actually local elections were quite interesting. The swing is not as big as you think. And, some pundits are saying it looks like about 48 seats at the moment. Who knows? All I know is we're going to carry on fighting because if we don't, we've already lost. So 9th of June, at least I could say we fought.
Gina, thank you very much.